Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey, here again. A few years ago, in the depths of pandemic-induced house arrest, I was trawling through YouTube looking for something nature-focused to play for my kids to distract them and free myself up to work without the associated guilt of putting on yet another mindless cartoon. As I scrolled, I came across a video on a channel called Blue World TV hosted by underwater filmmaker and adventurer Jonathan Bird. I believe the subject was a visit he paid to Aquarius Reef Base, the only permanent underwater research facility in the world located in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. I was struck, as were my kids, by Bird's incredibly personable hosting style. His enthusiasm and curiosity were infectious, immediately reminiscent of people like Jacques Cousteau and Steve Irwin. We soon found ourselves digging deep into his channel's archives, learning about sharks that actually protect fish, diving into caves and shipwrecks, and tagging along as he explored beautiful aquascapes all over the world. I was already a fan of Bird when a chance encounter brought us face to face a few years later when he visited the aquarium as a participant in the Giant Screen Cinema Association's annual conference. You see, in addition to his work on YouTube, Bird is also an accomplished large-format filmmaker, and two of his films, Ancient Caves 3D and Secrets of the Sea 3D, have been presented at the aquarium's IMAX theater. Bird and I hit it off, and a few months later, he visited the aquarium to promote Secrets of the Sea. During this visit, he fit in time to film an episode of Blue World focused on the aquarium's work to raise marine species using eggs collected in-house by our aquarist. A few months ago, Bird made yet another trip to Chattanooga to raise awareness of his latest project called the Dolphins 3D. I managed to snag a quick interview with him before he raced off to present the film, which is now playing at our IMAX 3D theater as I'm recording this in March of 2025. While scrunched together in the studio dive cage, Bird and I talked about what he learned about dolphins' secret strategy for hunting fish in groups, how he managed to film dolphins without drawing too much attention to himself, and what makes this project work so well on a giant screen. That sounds like a call I'd be glad I answered. How about you? Anyway, on with the podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today, I thought we'd bring in a special guest, Jonathan Bird, who is an underwater cinematographer and a friend of the aquarium. Actually, you've been to the aquarium a couple of times.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit, before we talk about the film that you're here to promote, let's talk a little bit about your past experience here at the aquarium. You came and actually had a pretty unique experience diving at the aquarium.
So I have the unique fortune to work on the largest screens and the smallest screens. I don't really do a lot in between. So I make IMAX films, documentaries, underwater. That's my specialty. And I make a YouTube series called Jonathan Bird's Blue World.
One of my favorite things on YouTube.
Thank you. And we have a blast making it because we get to go all over the place and do all these underwater topics. And when I first started doing it, it was mostly like marine life type subjects, things, sharks and, whatever we could film that was really interesting from a marine life perspective. But then we started branching out and we started doing episodes about wreck dives, and then we started getting invitations. Like we got to go to NASA and film how astronauts train underwater in the giant pool, the neutral buoyancy lab. And we worked with the Aquarius Reef Base in Florida, where they do saturation diving and they live underwater for weeks at a time. And so we've had all these amazing experiences, and somewhere along the line, we did an episode at the New England Aquarium in Boston, and it was very, very popular. We did it sort of like a fun take on dirty jobs, where I pretended to be an aquarist for a day, and they basically had me do all the worst aquarist jobs. But then at the end, we got to go diving in the giant tank, and it was a really fun episode to make. And I was actually fascinated by behind the scenes at a big aquarium. And so when we were down here last year for the premiere of a giant screen film that I had worked on, we took the opportunity to stay for a few days and go behind the scenes here at the Tennessee Aquarium. So it's pretty exciting. It was a pretty fun episode.
Yeah, you got to dive in our largest exhibit. So the Secret Reef is the largest exhibit. It's in our Ocean Journey building, 618,000 gallons. It's 33 feet deep. And that exhibit is a recreation of the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. And I cannot remember, Jonathan, have you actually been diving in that, in the real version of that?
Yes, we did a couple of episodes there.
That's what I thought. So
yes.
Having had that experience then, how close would you say that our exhibit replicates that wild habitat?
It replicates it very well, except that I think you have a higher density of fish. You know what I mean? Like, because you can go out and get a whole bunch of fish and stick them in there. You're not, if you go to the flower gardens, it is not likely that you'll see that many sharks. You might see one or two, but I mean, you're not going to see a ton of them. So you've taken it's like the greatest hits, you know what I mean? Like, you've taken the best of that entire place and put it into a smaller area so everybody can see everything. That's kind of the only difference. I mean, it feels very much like that reef.
So it's like the flower garden banks, just the singles.
Exactly.
So you've been, like you mentioned, you've been diving all over the world. You've done wrecks, you've done underwater caves. You mentioned a couple of those other special locations you've been able to dive in. What's unique about diving in an aquarium like ours, or like the one you went to up in New England?
Well, aquaria are always in ideal conditions. You know, when you're working with Mother Nature, you can have bad weather. You can't get to the dive site because the boat can't go, or you do go and everybody throws up. You can have bad visibility. If you're trying to hunt for a particular animal that you want to film, you might not find them. One of the really nice things about diving in aquariums, you always get an ideal conditions. The water's clear, the animals are there. I really like, and of course it's very convenient. You put your dive gear on and you boom, fall in the water and there's the animals. And the story that we did with you guys was really unique and interesting. It wasn't just like, hey, let's go diving in this aquarium. Like, the focus of our story was something that you do that's incredibly unique, and not many institutions can pull it off. And that is the whole idea that the fish are spawning all the time, but the eggs mostly just get, sucked into the filtration and they die. But you guys find a way to skim them off, hatch them, and then what's even more difficult is raise the tiny diatom food that they eat. And it looks like you've got like a little brewery going back behind the scenes with grow lights, so these bubbling cauldrons growing this little green soup full of all these little plants that those tiny baby fish need to live. And then you grow them up and you put them back. And so it's like you're creating your own new fish rather than what most aquaria do, and they go out and they just take them from the wild. And this is like way more work. I mean, I'm sure that the fish are much more expensive to raise than they would be to go out and gather. But I mean, that's really cool to me.
Yeah, it's one of those walk the talk kind of situations. So we obviously promote the idea of marine conservation. And as you mentioned, it's very difficult to raise your own fish, which is why so many aquariums don't do it. There are so many different obstacles that have to be overcome. You had to figure out, what can we feed marine fish? They tend to be smaller than freshwater species when they come out of the egg. There's the broadcast spawning that you mentioned, that kind of, there's not a nest usually for you to go and find the eggs in. You sometimes don't even know what you're hatching because it's hard to tell them apart when they're small like that. And then, we had to figure out what to feed the fish. Then we had to figure out what to feed the thing that we feed the fish. So I don't want to spoil too much of the episode because you go into all of that. But yeah, it's an interesting program, and it was a really great opportunity to have you come and document it. Let's talk about the reason you're here now. You're here for the Giant Screen Cinema Association's International Conference. We've hosted that conference. I think this is our 4th year of doing it. And you are here to talk about a new film, Call of the Dolphins. So
Correct.
So give us kind of the elevator pitch, since I guess that's kind of what you're doing while you're here is selling the film to distributors and that sort of thing. So what is this film about?
Well, everybody kind of loves dolphins. I love dolphins. I wanted to make a film about dolphins, and I think the market was ready for one. There was a very good film about dolphins that McIlroy Freeman did in the year 2000. So now it's 24 years since then. It's time. It's the market is ready for a new one. And what I wanted to do though is I wanted a lot of dolphin films. They try to show like how smart they are and all the things they can do, but they do it with animals that are in captivity because these animals have been trained to like do tests, and like you can very easily illustrate a lot of the special things that dolphins can do when they've been trained to demonstrate it. You know what I mean? But I wanted to do a film that was completely shot in the wild dolphins all around, and the scientists that are studying them. And the reason for that was I felt like a 40-minute documentary of nothing but dolphins swimming around underwater and us talking about them was going to be a little boring. You know what I mean? And I think that when you get into the world of dolphins, there are so many interesting people that are studying them, that are doing the wildest research to try to figure out how do we learn about how these animals live in the wild. And that was a real challenge. And I met all these great people. And so I tell people that it's not just a film about dolphins. It's actually a film about the people who love dolphins.
So is there like a through line or a thread that connects a lot of the people who work with dolphins? Do they tend to be motivated by the same kinds of things? Or was it a really, are there diverse origin stories for their entrance into the scientific field?
I think it's very diverse. It's very diverse. And we, in the film, we have a whole bunch of different people. And one of the things that we wanted to do was also not just focus on dolphins that all look like Flipper. There are like 70 species of animals that we consider dolphins, starting with the biggest one, which is the orca, is actually a dolphin, believe it or not, and like something like the pilot whale that's almost as big as the orca. All the way down to these tiny little harbor porpoises that are like teeny little guys. And so we wanted to...
You say teeny, how teeny?
Like 3 to 4 feet long.
Oh, wow.
That only weigh 100 pounds.
Jeez.
So there's a lot of things, that are dolphins. And so we didn't want to just all be bottlenose dolphins, although bottlenose and spotted dolphins are the species we filmed most because they are the species that you encounter the most in the wild. So in terms of if you don't have a $10 billion budget, you have to go after the animals you're most likely to be able to film. But so we did that. So we met all these different researchers that are studying them in different ways. Like pilot whales, they dive to thousands of feet deep to feed. You don't study those the same way you study bottlenose dolphins that are rarely in water more than 50 feet deep. We filmed a group of dolphins that actually not too far from here in South Carolina that feed by stranding fish on the beach. And then in contrast to that, we worked with IFAW, with their group of volunteers on Cape Cod that rescue dolphins that get stranded on beaches.
What is IFAW?
The International Fund for Animal Welfare.
Got it, okay.
And they actually go by IFAW now. That's like their brand.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to say all those words. And they have, believe it or not, I live in Massachusetts, and so only a few hours from my house is Cape Cod. And Cape Cod is the #1 dolphin stranding location on planet Earth. More than 400 dolphins a year are stranded on Cape Cod. And it's not that there's anything wrong with them. They're not sick. They're lost. They get lost. They're because it's shaped like an arm, and they're coming down the coast and they hit Cape Cod and they're like, oh, wait a minute, that's weird. There's land in the way. And so they turn east to try to go out and around the land, and they hit more land, and then they get confused. And by now they're way into the inside of the Cape. And then they go, okay. And they go north to try to get back out of there. And then they still hit land. So they basically get boxed in, and then they end up in these shallow bays trying to get through somehow, get out, and they're lost and they're confused. They're not sick. And then the tide goes out, and then they're stranded on the mud. And then, if they don't get rescued, they're in deep trouble. And so there's a group, the IFAW runs a group of hundreds of volunteers, and they have a rescue almost every week. I mean, sometimes it's one animal and sometimes it's 100 animals. So they are amazing heroes.
And is the stranding part of the film?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were on call with them for a whole winter. Like every time there was a stranding event, they would call. Tim Gears is my co-producer on the film, a good friend of mine. You met him. He was here with the Blue World shoot. He lives on the Cape, and so he was close enough that when they called, he could get to the site within 90 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I'm more like 3 hours out. So like if they called me, by the time I got there, I missed it. So by the time he got there, he could get the rescue. And then by the time I got there, I could help film the release. And so he was really our second unit director of strandings. And he was on call basically for 6 months. And they would call him, and then they would evaluate what are the chances that he's going to get there in time. Is he going to get some good footage? How's the situation look? And then he would go, he would shoot, he would evaluate, and then he would call me and give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Like, yes, you should come. No, you shouldn't come. Like, as if it was really late in the afternoon, like, I'm not going to get there before dark. I'm not going to be able to do anything. So it was really tricky, even only being a couple hours away. That was the most difficult part of this film. And ironically, it was much easier for me to fly to the Bahamas and film wild dolphins underwater than it was to film dolphin rescues in my own backyard.
You mentioned that there had been previous works, IMAX films based on dolphins, but they're 24 years old at this point. Obviously, in that time, so much has changed in terms of filmmaking in general, but I'm sure underwater filmmaking and giant screen filmmaking. So talk a little bit about the things that you could do with this project that would have been inconceivable or impossible 24 years ago.
That is such a great question. Because, IMAX cameras used to be enormous film cameras that were literally like the size of your college dorm refrigerator. And then you put it in an underwater housing and it's even bigger than that. And you can't swim it through the water very well with wild dolphins. And with this film, I built a special rig for filming swimming dolphins that was an extremely powerful underwater scooter that the cave divers use when they got to get way back into a cave, with a camera, an 8K camera strapped to it. And
8K, wow.
Because you need a ton of resolution for IMAX, so you need 8K. And there's not that many 8K cameras available yet, but there are a few, and most of them are big cinema cameras. So I needed something smaller than that. And so I built the most compact rig I could to shoot in 8K with these dolphins. And then I was filming swimming with them, like in the pod. Like I was part of the pod, and the dolphins love that. Like they just think that is so fun. Like,
so you're just like an honorary dolphin.
I got to be an honorary dolphin for like as long as I could hold my breath, which is, like 35 seconds. But yeah, no, I keep going up to the surface, grab a breath and keep doing it. And I had a blast with that, And then of course, that's only for a few shots in the film, but for a lot of the stuff, you're trying to get their behavior. So one of the things that I did was I went to a rebreather, and so instead of being underwater breath holding, which you're only going to get, even if you're an amazing free diver, you're only going to get a minute or two of footage. And then you're going to have to go up. I want to film what they're doing on the bottom. They're feeding, they're hunting, they're playing, they do all this stuff. And it's only 30 feet deep where these spotted dolphins are playing. But if you're not down with them, you're going to miss a lot. And I want to be down with them. But when we've done it we did one shoot on open circuit scuba. And, it wasn't like they wouldn't come around, but they definitely keep their distance because it's annoying. Like they're animals of sound, and scuba bubbles are really noisy. And the analogy that I make with this is like, imagine if you're having like a talk with your friend and there's a dog barking right next to you. Okay. Now the dog isn't attacking or anything. It's just barking. Maybe it's barking at the dog next door, but it's just noisy and it's distracting. And it's really hard to carry on a conversation when there's this distracting, noisy thing. And I'm like, I'm the distracting, noisy thing down there with my bubbles. And are they going to carry on their conversations with each other? Are they going to look for food? Are they going to act normal if there's something that's down there that is so not normal? You know what I mean? So I was like, how can I be like as much invisible as possible? And the idea was to use a rebreather and make no bubbles. So now I'm really quiet. So I'm still visually, they can see me, like with their echolocation, they can see me from hundreds of yards away. Like they know I'm there, but I'm not annoying. And what I found at first, I think it backfired, because at first I think they're smart enough to know that normally we're noisy and we make bubbles. And they're like probably thinking, how does this guy hold his breath so long, right? And then I was a curiosity, and they were like coming around, and I couldn't get them to even stay far enough from the camera to film. Like they're just like right in the camera, like looking at me. And then finally, I think they got bored. They're like, okay, well, that's the guy that can hold his breath a really long time, I guess. And then they went back to their normal stuff, and that's when I started getting good footage.
What moment are you most proud of having captured, whether you went down with that on your checklist or not?
So I think, believe it or not, my favorite sequence in the film was not underwater.
Really?
But it was the strand feeding, where dolphins cooperate to hunt, and they sort of find a school of fish and they come at them from multiple angles at once, and the fish panic and they swim, and they don't realize that they're swimming towards shore. And the dolphins keep pushing, and then they make a bow wave. Like the whole group of them together, they make like a bow wave, and it throws the fish like up onto the beach. And the dolphins keep coming, and they slide right up on the sand out of the water, and they grab the fish that are flopping around on the sand, and then they like wiggle back into the water. Like they just kind of like, and they wiggle back in, and then it actually works. And they only do it in one place where the topography is such that the banks are really steep.
So they can get back in.
So they know they can get back in. And it's a behavior that's been passed down through the generations. Like they learned it from their parents, and then they teach their children, and it gets passed down. And in other places they have never learned to do it. Maybe, who knows why? Maybe the banks aren't good, but you need like just the right circumstances for them to do it. And so there's only one place they're known. I shouldn't say that. There's a few places in the world that they're known to do it, but there's only a few, and there's only one in the U.S. And so it's just an amazing spectacle. And we spent a while to get this sequence, because the water's like brown where they do it. It's in an estuary. The water has like zero visibility. We didn't even bother trying to shoot anything underwater. And we're shooting a lot of the footage from a drone, and you can't even see far enough into the water from the air to see the dolphins. So you don't even know where they are.
Oh, wow.
And every once in a while, a dorsal fin comes up and you're like, oh, they're over there. And then day after day, we were missing it. They were doing it on the other side. Oh, we're not there. Oh, they were doing it over there. But oh no, we were on the wrong end of the beach. And we just kept missing it. And it was getting so frustrating. And then we realized that somehow the pelicans can see them. And the pelicans, and I realized if we just go wherever the big flock of pelicans is whatever direction they're going, we'll get the shot. Because what happens is when the fish come up on the beach, the pelicans grab a whole bunch of the fish, and we call them, what do we call them in the script? Like fish swipers or something. We call them fish bandits. We call them the feathered fish bandits. So we finally figured out, we don't need to know where the dolphins are. We just need to know where the pelicans are. So we were symbiotically using the pelicans to help us film.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So Jonathan, the giant screen is kind of your, it's not necessarily your bread and butter, because you obviously have the YouTube channel as well. But what about this film does best in giant screen? Like why giant screen? Why should people see this in giant screen?
Well, I think it's very hard for people to appreciate the experience of swimming with a dolphin on anything but a really big screen. And that's what is great about IMAX. It just gives experiences like no other. You just can't replicate it on the small screen. I did a film a few years ago, which was my first IMAX. It's called Ancient Caves, and it showed here. And it's this film that takes you into these caves working with scientists. And a lot of the sequences in the film, because again, I'm an underwater guy, a lot of the sequences of the film are underwater in some of the most beautiful caves in the world, some just amazing places to be. And in the giant screen, it really feels like you're there. Like the audience comes out of that film going like, whoa, that was incredible. And it's because giant screen can give you that experience. And people have been asking me, friends of mine that are like, they don't live near a giant screen theater or an IMAX theater. And they're asking me like, where can I see it? Like, when are you going to have it on Amazon? When's it going to be on streaming? And my answer is never, because it's not the same thing. Like it wasn't shot for TV. It's not going to look good on TV. It's not going to give that experience on TV. This is the kind of thing where you really got to go and see it in the theater. That's what it's for,
Jonathan, it is always a pleasure to get a chance to talk with you and chat and catch up. How can people find out what you're doing and learn about your projects, whether that's Call of the Dolphins or whatever else you happen to be working on?
We have all these different websites, and we don't really ever pull it all together into one. But Jonathan Bird's Blue World, or blueworldtv.com, is where you find what we're doing with that series. It's all kind of in one place there, so that you don't have to go hunt it down on YouTube. As for the giant screen films, all of our films are distributed by McIlvray Freeman Films, and so you can go to their website, and they keep on their site. Each of our films have their own page, and they keep a current listing of where the films are showing, and then with a link, and you can click to that theater, and it'll give you the show times and all that stuff. So that's the place to watch for this film and my other films.
Great. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us here on the
Thanks,
podcast
Casey.
Aquatic. And if you have any ideas for a future episode or a question, maybe even a question for Jonathan, I think I might be able to send some to him by email. Send those to me at podcast@tnaqua.org. And in the meantime, until the next time that we talk, remember that every drop matters.